How's it going, everybody? It's been a little while since we've had one of these, and usually I like talking about these in a separate video, but there was so little known about this that really there hasn't been a lot to talk about other than the reveals, and I like to kind of do the reveals when they were all done, and we didn't get all these until relatively recently. But this is an opening of the Dissidia anniversary box. Go ahead and open that up. I'm going to just kind of unbox this, talk about the new cards inside a little bit. I'll give kind of my impressions of the product and everything else. So, for posterity, one of these was opened at the shop before I took this, so I do know what's in this, but I want to talk a little bit about it as we kind of dive along and go into it. So first things first, it's in a different packaging, and actually I really, really like this packaging for future products. I hope they continue this. I could very easily see this being like a great box for like if you're a Commander Magic player, you want like a 100 card box. This seems like a great size for that, and the art's fantastic as well. Um, I hope that I would love for them to do this for every structure deck moving forward. That's essentially. I got my hopes up a little bit that this would be more like the anniversary box, and I think this is a little bit more of an actual starter deck. So let's go ahead. We're going to pull these out. What have we got? We have a full set list for a how to play guide, starting deck, fire and ice, crystals, basic explanations, customize wind as your third color. So a lot more like the 13 and 10 starter deck than it is like the versus decks, which usually is good. These tend to be better decks than the alternatives are, so I am a-okay with that. A little bit of a guide on what your summons are, what your cards do. We take a look at the back. Fire, wind, ice winds. You can kind of do anything you want to do with any of these, right? Very, very cool, actually. I really like that as a product design decision. I don't know how useful that actually is. I think a lot of people that are buying this product are probably already in the game or maybe somewhat new. And then we have a starter guide full of all the Dissidia cards, it looks like, for the art, which is cool. I think that's pretty nice. Alright, so let's get into the meat of it. Inside the box, we have this, which is a spacer. And we have 2 bricks of cards, one of which was not sealed. Interesting. And that's it. So, very nice little storage box. I'm actually quite happy with that. Easily my favorite thing about the product. This packaging is really nice. Alright, so this is a cube of cards. Let's find the little thing. And we're going to go card by card. I'm going to separate the new cards out from the rest, since hopefully if you're in here, you probably know the rest of the cards, and even if you know the game, probably a refresher on the new stuff is worth it. So, the cover card is a Light Bartz. Something I really don't like in this. Hold on. So if you never had a deck like this in Final Fantasy, whenever you get it, just take the edges and just do this. Makes it a lot easier to actually work with. For whatever reason, when they cut these for starter decks, they kind of have a tendency to stick. So we get a full 3 copies of the Bartz, including 1 non-foil full art. This should have been foil. I'm not going to lie. I think this is kind of inexcusable that we have a starter deck we paid more for that does not have a exclusive foil in it. That just makes no sense to me. So Bartz, 4-drop, Wanderer, Warrior of Light, enters the field. You can search for a DFF character other than light or dark, add it to your hand, and gain a crystal. Crystals are generally valued about 1.5, so if you can get both sides of this card's text, it's essentially a free card, almost. You can also remove from the game to gain a crystal from the break zone, and if you have two, you have to have 2 DFF forwards for that to happen. So we have 3 full copies of that, 1 copy of Cosmos, 3 copies of a new Onion Knight, Job Onion Knight, and Warrior of Light. It has haste. When it enters the field, you may pay 2 crystals to search for a category DFF forward of cost 3 or less or play it onto the field. So the new thing is that Dissidia is a real category now. which is interesting. Dissidia has never been a category that has had synergy until now. It's just been a thing they put on cards that happen to use Dissidia art. Um, there's also a special that does 10,000 damage to the forward that blocks Onion Knight. It's not a particularly powerful one or impactful one. That glare is really bad. I'm sorry about the camera setup. I just am dealing with a new laptop situation and don't have a better solution for now. I will work on that for when 21 comes out and I do my box opening. 3 copies of a new Cloud. You can pay 2 crystals instead of paying 5 to cast him. And when he enters the field, choose a forward. You deal 3,000 for each DFF forward you control. This is like a new type of EX burst they've been trying. Barrett and Opus 20 has this. I think it's pretty dreadful. You tend to not take damage when you have multiple forwards on the field. Even if it's a DFF character, like, there's not a lot of DFF backups. 3 copies of a new Firion. It's a 2-drop Warrior Rebel. When it enters the field, if you can choose a forward, deals 3,000. You control 2 or more DFF forwards, so himself plus 1 other. You get to do 7,000 instead. 7,000 for 2 CP is a pretty good rate, but it does require setup. And if a character opponent controls is put from the field to the break zone, you gain a crystal, but it only triggers once per turn. All in all, I think the Cloud is pretty bad unless we're absolutely swimming in crystals. I just don't think it's going to have relevant text often enough. The Onion Knight is scary. There are some really good targets for this. And the Bartz is potentially a decent card as well. Going for our reprints, 3 copies of Cyan from Opus 11, 3 copies of the Opus 7 Samurai, 3 copies of the Crystal Samurai, 2 copies of Edgar, I guess because it's category DFF, and 3 copies of Opus 15 Bahamut as the fire cards that we are getting with the deck. I'm going to go ahead and put the starter deck cards like over here, like kind of one of each. Cloud and Firion. So then we have our ice package. We have 3 copies of a new ice Shantoto. Glad to see Shantoto falling out of Earth. I just don't think we're ever going to see Earth Shantoto be a thing again. So DFF, Mage, when she enters the field, you can pay 2 crystals to revive a DFF forward of cost 5 or less. And she has a special for Ice and S, where she chooses 3 characters, duel and freeze them. That special is very, very good, and because Shantoto has so many backups, it's actually pretty possible to loop that with something like a Roble, right? Which is really cool. I don't know that you could play an Ice Earth and get away with not playing the Shantoto backup, but maybe you can, and in that situation, this Shantoto will be quite good. The real question, though, and it's the thing that I don't know that this deck is answering, is why am I playing crystals? And I don't know. 3 copies of a new Terra that I'm actually quite excited for. So when Terra enters the field, you can make your opponent discard a card. If you control 2 or more category DFF crystals, also gain a crystal. Notably, she can gain a crystal with lock on the field. And for Ice and Tap, you can choose a forward, duel and freeze it, and draw a card. I think this is now the best Terra for 6 decks if you wanted to play a Terra forward instead of the backup. Maybe as a nice little fun of in that deck. The lock in particular is category DFF, so you do have a target. Lastly, I think probably the card in the starter deck that I think will see the most play, at least initially. 3 copies of Noctis. You must control a category DFF forward to cast Noctis. And when Noctis enters the field on EX Burst, you can break a dull forward opponent controls. That is a very good EX Burst. Just a matter of how awkward is it to actually play this card. And because he can still be cheated into play, I think there's actually a fair number of decks that are going to enjoy playing Noctis. For our reprints, 3 copies of Opus 9 Laguna Common, 3 copies of Night to generate more crystals, 3 copies of Opus 16 Devout. 2 copies of Kate Sith, a card that very desperately needed a backup. And 3 Opus 13 Shiva rares. Not in love with the reprints. I mean, it's not like Knight and Devout were hard to get, but Kate Sith is great. The Laguna is just kind of nice to have, if definitely overcosted for what he is. But I do think that at least the Noctis and the Terra here will indeed see some play. And some experimentation. There's just too much good stuff going on there, I think, for them to not be considered. And then we have our Wind package. 3 copies of Warrior of Light, a newly, very hotly contested name. When Warrior of Light or a DFF forward enters your field, you gain a crystal. This triggers only once per turn, so it's essentially the Opus 20 Cecil. Till the end of the, you could pay a crystal to give him 1,000 power and make him unchoosable by opponent's abilities. So this is intended to be a crystal generation engine. Speaking of Cecil, we have a new Cecil as well. 3 copies. Says cannot be chosen by your opponent's abilities. If you would be dealt damage by abilities, it becomes 0 instead. And he is a 2k Anthem for DFF forwards. And then for special plus wind, choose a forward of cost 4 or more and break it. I am not a big fan of this card. I don't really think it does anything. So we've kind of got this weird, like, untargetable wind thing going on. I don't really think it's going to do all that much. Like, Cecil could be annoying for, like, some fire decks to get rid of, but, like, most good decks are playing summons, and as long as summons kill Cecil, then you're playing a 4 CP forward that doesn't really have a lot of text or utility. 3 copies of Tidus. Tidus is a 5 CP EX burst. When he enters the field, choose a forward opponent controls, return it to its owner's hand, and when a forward opponent controls is returned from the field to the hand, draw a card, gain a crystal, triggers only once per turn. There's not a lot of bounce synergy in this deck, which is a little annoying. They very clearly try to avoid putting these in water or earth because those were the elements that already had good crystal payloads. So there's not a lot of ways to proc Tidus other than himself. But drawing a card and getting a crystal on every bounce is kind of good. It's like a little bit of a mini Tros. The other weird thing is Wind doesn't bounce opponent stuff very often, outside of like the really, really big stuff. It's not like Water where it's like very common. So I do think this is maybe the best Tidus if you wanted to play like a Tidus to play with the Unilegend for Opus 19. But all in all, I'm definitely a lot less impressed with the Wind side of things. The Warrior of Light's very good. And Tidus is, like, serviceable, but nothing super exciting. 3 copies of the Opus 10 Starter Kane. Probably a card that did need a reprint, even if it's not particularly exciting. 3 copies of the Crystal Gen Dragoon. 3 copies of Selkie from Opus 16, which I guess is just the Wind backup that we throw in our Wind starter decks nowadays. Which is fine. I actually really like the card. I think it's pretty cool. 2 copies of backup Ishtola from Opus 7. Probably not a bad card to have access to. Ishtola is just a relevant name. And 3 copies of 4 CP Alexander. Again, just a nice summon to have, but also not one that's particularly hard to get thanks to its previous reprint. So we're going to put our Tidus here. Cecil, and our Warrior of Light. For the extra reprints, let's go through them real quick. 3 copies of Opus 10 Starter Terra, just a nice card for everybody to have access to. 3 copies of Opus 16 Onion Knight, a less impactful card. This is a common. 3 copies of Ifrit. This is also a common. 2 copies of Squall. This is an Opus 10 Legend. Actually, probably needs the reprint. 3 copies of Opus 15 Snow. Not a card that's really seen a lot of play. 3 copies of Opus 15 Shiva. Actually, a pretty decent card. One that doesn't need the reprint for sure, but does need to actually be in this deck if it's a crystal generating ice deck. And in my opinion, this is a much better card than the other sheave that we gained access to in this. 2 copies of the Opus 6 Wind Legends Zidane. I guess it's in here because it's category DFF, but I don't really like this card in here. I don't think it's particularly good. 3 copies of the Opus 10 Von Hero. Again, not a very exciting card. 3 copies of Gachi Misera. It's fine. Again, it's another common, not one that really needs a reprint. 2 non-foil crystal tokens. The weirdest inclusion of the entire set. 1 singular foil Ishtola 10. Or 21. It's the only foil card in the entire deck for some reason, and it's a hero from the upcoming set that will be playing in foil in that set anyway, so I don't really understand why they gave this in foil here. Like, I get they didn't want to give us a foil full art, because they wanted to print this as a full art in the next set, but, like, I don't know, I think you could have thrown us a bone here and give us a full art of Bart's in foil, or, like, a foil of any of these, rather than just, like, randomly hollowing out a card that's going to be very easy to get hollow next set as well. If your opponent has 2 or less cards in hand, she gains haste, 4 CP 8k. When she attacks, you get to deal 9,000 damage, minus 1,000 for each card in your opponent's hand. So another, but one of your punishers for a low hand size. Definitely an interesting card. Lastly, we get a reprint, 1 non-foil full art of all of the Dissidia characters. Let's go ahead and move these out of the way. So notably, there is synergy with these with Dissidia characters, but a lot of these cards will not have synergy inside of the deck. 1 copy of Warrior of Light, Opus 16. 1 copy of Opus 18 Farian. 1 copy of Onion Knight, Opus 13 Hero. 1 copy of Opus 16 Cecil, actually quite an expensive card, definitely needs the reprint. 1 copy of Bart's. 1 copy of Terra from Opus 15. 1 copy of Cloud from Opus 14. This card was expensive for no reason and absolutely needed the reprint. 1 copy of Opus, the Promo Squall, that did not need a non-foil full art. 1 copy of Zidane from Opus 19. 1 copy of Opus 16 Tidus. This is another card that definitely could have used the reprint. 1 copy of Opus 16 Shantoto, another one that I'm happy to see get reprinted. 1 copy of Vaughn from Opus 14. Opus 13 Lightning. A non-foil full art of the same Ishtola. 1 copy of Noctis, Opus 12. 1 copy of Ramza. And a copy of Ace. All in all, I've said they needed to rework how they work their starter decks and their structure decks, and this is definitely a rework of them. I just don't think there's a lot here, to be honest. The starter cards are clearly very, very good, right? I don't think that that's denying anything, but the product is very, very disjointed feeling. Like, it wants to be the build your own starter deck, but it wants to be this, like, anniversary product. But because the way these cards work, all of these have synergies with cards that have been printed for a long time and haven't had synergies until now. They kind of read as an incoherent mess. This deck really needs some time to be solved, and it's using a mechanic that historically has been underpowered. And actually, I think crystals are kind of problematic in design due to how xenophobic it is as a mechanic. The only thing that makes crystals better is more crystals, but we're still playing the same crystal generation cards from Opus 15 now, right? We don't have better backups to generate crystals than these, horrendous backups, and the opportunity cost of playing, anything else is just causing problems at this point. And I don't know if there's a solution that's not just print crystals on every card going forward. And I don't want them to do that either, which makes me think that I just don't see a future for a lot of these cards outside of very niche situations. I think that, in decks that are instantly generating crystals, Onion Knight might actually be good to cheat in something like a Lulu or a Zidane, and get two hasty forwards on the field for two crystals and 4 CP. But even there, this dies to Amaterasu. It still burns the two crystals. I think that Terra is just a name that desperately needed a good generic forward that didn't pair with summons. So this one will actually see some play. And Noctis is a card that doesn't play with crystals at all, so it'll see some play. But the rest of these are just going to have to find a deck, like a home. If they do, I mean, the Bartz again has good text, but it's so generic that it's like this kind of goes anywhere and nowhere all at once. DFF character does let you get backups, but if 4 CP4 that gets a backup isn't anything special. Like, if that was good enough, we would be playing a lot of other cards at this point, unless there are some really crazy DFF backups that I'm not thinking of. Like Shantoto, obviously, but like, I don't think any of our DFF backups are engine cards or anything like that. Again, Farian is a decent card, but it's going to be one of those cards that, like, you're going to put together a fire deck, and then you're going to check how many DFF forwards do I have, right? Cloud sucks. Tidus doesn't have any necessarily DFF synergies. It's more a big stuff matters type of card, or bounces matter. Cecil and Warrior of Light, it's like this weird thing with like DFF and crystals. Same for Shantoto. I don't know how to evaluate these cards in a vacuum, and until I really start building and cooking with these, I don't know how much I can recommend this product, given that it's more expensive as well. They've raised the MSRP on this product by quite a bit, and I'm not sure that it's worth it, especially when these start coming in Opus 21 in foil. How much are we going to need the non-foils at that point, right? So, I don't know. I'm hoping this has better legs than their previous structure decks, given that most of those tend to not hold value for very long. I don't know if they just overprint them or if they haven't had a value proposition, but like, where's the Amaterasu, right? Just one Amaterasu. We're in Wind. Throw a Bismarck in here, right? Like, I know it's not a DFF card, but like, maybe Cecil's like fine, right? Cecil's like maybe your one win card. If you're in Ice, throw a Physalis in here. Make these cards pull a little bit from that. Do we really need another copy of Opus 6 Zidane Legend, right? I just feel like there was so much potential with this box to reprint good stuff. Like, we have these Bahamets are, yes, they're crystal cards, but we're not swimming in crystals right now. Like, this deck by itself is not generating enough crystals to consistently fire the Onion Knight or um, the Shantoto. So, like, do we have the crystals to spend on that? Throw one copy of Amaterasu in. Throw a Chocobo in on the Wind side. Ice doesn't have any good summons, but like, again, throw a Physalis in there. I don't know. I'm happy. I think these cards have a lot of interesting implications and an interesting future. I just don't know if this product is what I think is a good future design direction. I don't like getting more for less, and I feel like I am with this product. Thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, sorry about kind of the awkward camera quality. I'm kind of doing the best I can with what I have. But, yeah. Let me know in the comments what you think, if there's any particular cards or strategies you're super excited to play with.